Hello and welcome back to Focus Atlanta. Thanks so much for continuing to watch. In this segment, we're going to talk a little bit about safety and what you may have in your medicine cabinet. I'm here with Dr. Toby Watson. Oh, thank you so much for making time for us. So often, not just each and every one of us, but we think about it as parents. We think about it as, how we're taking care of our family. Safety is really high on the priority list.
Absolutely. And when I think of safety, especially talking about mental health, and because unfortunately we use so much medication here in America, you have to think about informed consent and the idea of knowing about the medication and about the treatment options that people have when they're struggling, in some sort of way.
So often when we think about our mental health, medication is the last resort, right? To some extent, we all think, oh, I can power through it, or oh, maybe if I just have longer conversations with my psychologist. But sometimes each and every one of us, may need to take another step forward.
Correct. And we'd like to think that medication is kind of the last resort, but unfortunately, a friend of mine, Dr. Nicholas Cummings, who used to be in charge of the American Psychological Association, he did a study in 1990, and he found that when somebody went into a general practitioner who write the most medications, 90% got referred out for a mental health therapist or a counselor or some nutrition, or they looked at a lot of different variables. Well, he repeated that, and only 10% got put on medication. He then replicated the study in 2000, and what he found was astonishing. 90% got put on medication, and only 10% actually got referred out to a specialist for their mental health issues that were going on. So, unfortunately, the reality is the vast majority of general practitioners and pediatricians, they don't refer out for mental health professionals. They end up just using medication, right away.
That's astonishing. It's also kind of frightening. I mean, that's exactly the opposite direction that many of us want to go. We want to be able to get a handle on things ourselves, have conversations, find other methods. Not that there's anything wrong with medication, but we don't always want it to be our first,
Fine.
resort.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a first line of defense. In fact, I actually appeared on the Oprah Network and I appeared on a lot of other shows with Dr. Cummings years ago when we were really talking about this and saying that it shouldn't be used as a first line defense. And the problem is that if it was helping, and I mean that we had good positive outcomes, then I'd say, well, maybe that's the way to go. The problem is that, UNICEF did a study looking at all the developed countries of the world. And you know where America ended up? Second to last out of these like 30 countries, all the developed countries. So we're spending all the other developed countries almost combined here in America. We use about 90% of the world's Ritalin, even though it's not made here. But our outcomes are far worse than any other country. And I think that's where we need to start re-looking at this. And whether you like RFK or you don't, this new order that they've put out there to say, hey, make, our children healthy again, they're looking at these medications now very closely and saying, all right, if we're not getting the benefit that we're hoping for, maybe we need to start thinking alternative ways to work with our children and our young, our society.
Literally, you must have been reading my mind. There must be something on my forehead because my immediate thought was, what is this doing for our kids? I mean, so often we think about how it affects us, right, as adults, as parents, or whatever. But what are we pushing in terms of our children? Like, how do we stand? Where do we fare? Can we do better?
Right. And we really can. I mean, I remember the NAACP in 2006. Again, I've been doing this a long time. And they called for a reduction in medication use because they realized that, unfortunately, often inner city, the kids that are on Medicare, the kids that, in foster care, were being given 2 to 3 to 4 times, 400% increases over other populations. And so I think that the initiative started, quite some time ago to start to realize that, hey, the medications aren't the holy grail. We need to go back to our fundamentals and realize that today is different than when we were young. Again, I'm over 50, But go back 20, 30, 40 years, it's a radically different world. Young children now are getting, metal detectors when they go to school. They're having to deal with transgender issues that, are going on, which are adult conversations. They have school shooting drills that they have to deal with. There's a lot of, exposure to violence. Unfortunately, we don't have, kind of the mom, dad, intact families as much. And sometimes there's, problems that have increased from that. So the children today are dealing with much more stress, and they really need a place to put it. And that's the problem, is that kids often, because they don't have the verbal ability to talk about it and manage it and come up with ways to manage, they become, girls tend to become introverted. They become more depressed. They start cutting. They start doing things like that. And boys become extroverted. They start being silly, hyperkinetic. They start being bullies, and they start, getting ADHD diagnosing. And so it doesn't help us just to suppress the problem. These are our little prophets. These are the little, tadpoles in our ecosystem. And when the tadpole develops 3 eyeballs, you don't blame the tadpole. You don't drug the tadpole. You look upstream and you say, hey, what organization or what structural change do we need to make in order to help that little tadpole heal and get back to doing well?
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I can't let you get out of here though without giving us a website. Is there some place that we could go to get more information, to start these conversations?
Sure. In fact, actually, if you like Bart Simpson or My Little Pony or some of these other, characters, Nancy Cartwright is a good friend. She's the voice of these characters, and she has, and with me, knowmoreaboutdrugs.org. And you can find out about any medication you're taking on in a very simple, easy to read fashion on something called a medication guide.
Thank you so much for making time for us today here in Atlanta. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Absolutely. Enjoy.
Thank you. All right, guys, we can do something other than what we've been doing before. It just takes a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of, maybe sometimes you have to do a little research, sometimes you have to dig, but isn't it worth it to, change the tide? The statistics are pretty horrifying. We don't want to just throw medicine at everything. There are other ways, other things to do. Please take the opportunity to go to the website, learn more, and stay tuned to more Focus Atlanta. We'll be right back.